You know, what's the one question every single business has to answer every single day? It's not some big, complicated marketing plan. Nope, it's actually a really simple question, but the answer, well, the answer is what separates the businesses that make it from the ones that don't.
Think about it. Whether you're a giant car company or the coffee shop down the street, how do you decide? How many cars should roll off the line? How many lattes should you make? It sounds really complex, but the logic behind it is actually beautiful and, surprisingly, pretty simple. The key isn't to look at the whole picture. It's to look at the very next one. And believe it or not, the secret to all of this, it's right here in this ice cream shop. It all comes down to a powerful way of thinking called marginal thinking. And it boils down to just asking one simple question over and over. What happens if we make just one more? As you're about to see, asking that one little question changes everything.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to crack the code of costs. Then, we'll figure out what the market is telling us about how we make money. After that, we'll put those two together to find the golden rule of profit. And finally, we'll see it all in action at our ice cream shop.
Okay, let's start with the first piece of our puzzle, costs. Before a business can figure out how much to make, it has to get a really solid grip on what it costs to make anything in the first place. And as it turns out, not all costs are the same.
So, think of costs as being split into two big buckets. On one side, you have your fixed costs. This is stuff like the rent for your shop. You have to pay that rent whether you sell 1 scoop of ice cream or 1,000. Then you've got your variable costs, things like the cream, the sugar, the cones themselves. The more ice cream you decide to make, the more of this stuff you have to buy. Simple enough, right?
But this is where it gets really interesting. The key concept, the one that ties everything together, is called marginal cost. Now, this isn't your average cost per cone. No, this is the exact cost of producing just one more. So if you've already made 100 cones today, what's it going to cost you to make that 101st cone? That specific number, that's your marginal cost.
Okay, to really get a feel for this, let's use an example you'll totally get. Test scores. Let's say your average in a class is a solid 90. Now, your next test, your marginal test, you get an 80. What happens? It pulls your average down. If the next one is an 85, well, that's still below average, so the average continues to drop. But what if you ace the next test with a 92? Because that's above your average, it starts to pull the whole average back up. That marginal number is what steers the average. And that right there, that's a super important point to remember.
All right, let's look at some actual numbers here. Your total cost is just your fixed cost, that's the $1,000 that never changes, plus your variable costs. But look closely at the marginal cost. The first unit adds $10, the second unit only adds $8, and the third adds just $6. So why does that number change?
Well, it's because of a really powerful idea called diminishing returns. Imagine a busy sandwich shop, but it only has one grill. When you hire your first couple of cooks, they're super efficient. But as you add more and more cooks, what happens? They start bumping elbows, waiting for their turn at the grill. They're just in each other's way. So each new cook you add is actually producing less than the one before them. That means your cost to make each additional sandwich starts to go up. Your marginal cost begins to rise.
Okay, so we've got a handle on costs. But that's only half the story, right? To figure out if you're actually making a profit, you have to look at the other side of the coin, revenue. And for that, we have to listen to what the market is telling us.
So for our ice cream shop, we're going to imagine it's in what economists call a perfectly competitive market. All that means is that there are lots of other ice cream shops, all selling pretty similar stuff. Because of that, no single shop has the power to just decide what the price is going to be. They have to accept the market price. They are, in a sense, price takers.
And hey, if there's a marginal cost, you can bet there's a marginal revenue. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's the extra cash you bring in from selling just one more unit. If you sell one more cone, how much does your revenue go up? That's your MR.
And here's the best part, the thing that makes this whole thing so simple in a perfectly competitive market. If the going right, the market price for an ice cream cone is, say, $5, then guess what your marginal revenue is for every single cone you sell? Yep, it's $5. For the first cone, the 10th cone, the 100th cone. The price is your marginal revenue. In other words, P equals MR.
Okay, this is it. We've got our two main players on the board. We understand marginal cost, and we understand marginal revenue. Now it's time to bring them together and uncover the one simple rule that businesses use to make the most profit possible. So take a look at this graph. It brings everything into focus. That straight, flat line, that's our price, or our marginal revenue. It's a constant $5 for every cone. And that swooping curve that's going up, that's our marginal cost, which, as we know, eventually starts to rise because of diminishing returns. The secret to maximizing profit is found right where those two lines cross.
So let me ask you this. Just think about it for a second. If you can sell the next cone for $5 and it only cost you $3 to make it, you just made $2. Of course you're going to make that cone. What about the next one? Maybe it costs $4 to make. You're still making $1 in profit. So why on earth would you ever stop? The reason you stop is, well, it goes all the way back to diminishing returns. Eventually, that marginal cost curve is going to keep climbing. Sooner or later, the cost of making that very next cone is going to be something like $5.01. And if you're only getting $5 for it, you're now losing money on every extra cone you make. That's your signal. That's when you stop.
And that, my friends, brings us to the golden rule. To squeeze every last drop of profit out of your business, you should produce right up to the point where the price you get equals the marginal cost of making it. P equals MC. It's that simple and that powerful. It's a little counterintuitive, isn't it? Because most people get caught up in average costs. But the real pros, they always think on the margin.
All right, theory is one thing. But let's see how this golden rule plays out in the real world and actually helps solve a real problem for our ice cream shop owner. This is where the rubber meets the road.
Okay, so here's the deal with our ice cream shop. The accounting books say it's making a profit, about $1,300 a month. Not bad. But an economist would look at it differently. They'd factor in opportunity costs, like the salary the owner could be making if she worked somewhere else. Once you factor in that $2,500, the shop is actually losing over $1,200 a month. So the big question is, does she just close the doors?
But instead of just giving up, she does something brilliant. She thinks at the margin. She decides to see what happens if she just stays open a little later. Now look at this. The first extra hour, from 8 to 9 p.m., she brings in almost $60 in extra revenue. And it only costs her about $24. That's a huge win. The next hour, from 9 to 10, still profitable. But then, look at that third hour, from 10 to 11 p.m. The marginal revenue is now less than the marginal cost. She's losing money in that hour.
So what's the verdict? She stops at 10 p.m. By only adding those 2 profitable hours and not the third unprofitable one, she's following the rule perfectly. And the result? It's pretty amazing. She completely wipes out that huge economic loss and actually turns it into a small but very real economic profit.
This is the incredible power of marginal thinking. And this really sums it all up. The key wasn't to look at the whole day's profits or losses. It was to look at each individual hour. That one simple change in perspective literally saved her business.
You know, this whole golden rule thing, it's not just for businesses or ice cream shops. It works for pretty much any decision. Should you study for 1 more hour? Should you spend 1 more hour at the gym? The logic is exactly the same. Weigh the marginal benefit against the marginal cost. So think about it. What's one decision you're facing right now where thinking about 1 more could help you find a better answer?